Magic the Gathering Foundations is on its way out this week, and so we've got a lot of commanders to talk about. And this one is a personal favorite of mine because one of my favorite decks is, of course, a Niv Mizzet deck, the 5-color Niv Mizzet Reborn that I just cannot get enough of playing. It is one of the most interactive decks I've ever built. However, this new Niv Mizzet is in a very, very strange league of his own in that he goes infinite with himself, but not himself, and God, he's a very weird boy. We need to talk about him. This is Niv Mizzet Visionary, and this is going to be a spell-slinging, burning, draw-having monster of a deck. Let's get into it. Niv Mizzet Visionary is an Izzet and 4 commander with flying, the ability to give you no maximum hand size, and of course, anytime a source you control deals non-combat damage to a player, draw that many cards. What? No, seriously, what? That is insane. That is a nutty commander. That is one of the strongest things we've ever had printed on paper. That is nutso. Okay, so how are we going to build this thing? Any non-combat damage? Any at all? Okay, let's talk about non-combat damage, starting with Fiery Inscription. Anytime we have an instant or sorcery cast, this will deal 2 damage to every opponent. Crackling Perimeter will deal 1 damage to every opponent if we tap a gate. More on that later. Gandalf the Grey deals 3 damage to every opponent if we cast an instant or sorcery spell once per turn. It also lets us copy instants and sorceries and do all kinds of other fun, nutty stuff. Mischievous Chimera deals 1 damage to every opponent and lets us scry 1 if we cast our first spell any turn during an opponent's turn. Fear of Burning Alive deals 4 damage to every opponent when it touches the board. And if a source we control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, if we have 4 or more card types in our graveyard, we then deal that damage to any creature they control. That's gonna get out of hand really quickly. Gibbering Fiend deals 1 damage to each opponent, and if we have Delirium, which means we have 4 or more card types in the graveyard, then every single time if there are 4 or more card types in the graveyard, Gibbering Fiend deals 1 damage to a player at the beginning of their upkeep, which is just great. That's 1 damage every single turn for decks like Valgavoth, but more importantly, in Niv Mizzet, that's 1 damage a turn to just draw 1 card a turn. Then we have Tectonic Giant, which deals 3 damage to every opponent, and whenever it attacks or becomes target of spells, it gets that ability. We can also use it to exile the top 2 cards of our library, which can sometimes be important if we don't have Niv Mizzet out quite yet. That is already plenty of ways to just harm our opponents, but let's add in some more. Now, I labeled things incorrectly because Fiery Inscription should be in this next section, but here are the burn spells that function more as win conditions of the deck, beginning with Firebrand Archer. Whenever we cast a non-creature spell, deal 1 damage to every opponent. Coruscation Mage does the same thing, but it can copy itself. Erebor Smith does the same thing for instant or sorcery spells. Thermo Alchemist does the same thing. Gutter Snipe does the same thing, but it has a number 2 instead of a number 1. Unruly Catapult does the same thing, but anytime we cast instant or sorcery, we get to untap it to do it over and over and over again. Sunshot Militia lets us tap untapped artifacts to deal 1 damage to every opponent. Our deck contains 16 artifacts plus ways to make treasures. And speaking of artifacts, we also have Psychosis Crawler, who, whenever we draw a card, every opponent will lose 1 life, turning all of the draw from Niv Mizzet into straight up damage. Well, not damage, but loss of life. Ways to win the game, basically. But there's other Psychosis Crawler-like cards we need to talk about, and they are, of course, the other Niv Mizzets, beginning with Niv Mizzet Perun, who, goes infinite with the other Niv Mizzet. Let me explain. So in a world where you have Niv Mizzet Perun on the board, if you draw a card, deal 1 damage to any target. Okay, that's entirely fair. That's a reasonable thing to do to somebody. Then we have our other boy, Niv Mizzet, the commander of the deck. Whenever a source we control, like our other Niv Mizzet, deals non-combat damage to a player, we draw a card, which will trigger our other Niv Mizzet and just cause us to win. Look, I had a choice. I could either put 2 card infinites in the deck, or I could not have other Niv Mizzets. I chose to have other Niv Mizzets, because this dragon's ego is so large, we should have all the Niv Mizzets in any Niv Mizzet deck possible. Niv Mizzet Draco Genius does the same thing. If it deals damage to a player, we draw a card, and it can cause itself to deal 1 damage to a player. That's fair, but Niv Mizzet Firemind is closer to Perun, as it says whenever we draw a card, it deals 1 damage to any target and can tap itself to draw a card. Each of these Mizzets, 2 of them go infinite with the commander, and the other one is here for raw flavor alone. Use these to harm your opponents with combat damage, non-combat damage, whatever you want. It doesn't matter. They are Mizzets. They are doing their job, and their job is violence. But we are going to put a giant target on our backs with this kind of strategy, so let's also add in a bunch of ways to protect our commanders. Curator's Ward enchants a permanent, giving it hexproof, and if that permanent leaves the battlefield, we draw 2 cards if it was historic. So we put this on our commander, and our commander will be protected from targeted removal now. Mirror Shield does the same thing, but also gives it the ability to pseudo-block Death Touch, and then we have Giant's Ambit, which as long as our commander is untapped, it will have hexproof. This works very well unless your opponent is playing Hilda of the Ice Crown, in which case we just kind of get sad and die. And I mean, really, that's our opponent's fault, not our fault. We did our best. Anyway, those are the core strategies of the deck. Let's harm our opponents, and let's cause harm to our opponents to draw us cards. But we need other ways to draw cards when our commander's not on the board. Just so you guys know, having a commander that has the word draw on its butt does not mean that you can suddenly just not put in ways to draw cards on top of that. So let's get into that real quick. So typically, I would not consider cantripping drawing cards, but in a deck like this that has a draw commander, cantripping can function as card draw as it combos with other things in the deck. So let's talk about our 11 card quote draw package, starting with Flick a Coin. Deal a damage to any target, killing things like Llanowar Elf, but also creates a treasure token and draws as a card for 3 mana. Pretty good rate of return, especially if we're storing that treasure for later turns. Obsessive Search draws as a card and has Madness, so if we discard it, we can just auto-cast it. Speaking of discarding it, Grab the Prize does that. It can draw 2 cards and discard a card, but if we discard a non-land, this can deal 2 damage to every opponent, causing our commander to draw us 6. Pirate's Prize draws us 2 cards and makes a treasure token. Seize the Spoils draws us 2 cards, discards a card, and gives us a treasure token. Pirate's Pillage, Big Score, and Unexpected Windfall all draw, discard, and gives us treasure tokens. All stuff to make it easier to cast our commander. The Royal Scions let us draw and discard cards, and also give a commander 2/0 and First Strike and Trample until end of turn, which has some niche cases where it's necessary, like letting a Psychosis Crawler go in and beat an opponent to death violently with its little mittens. And then we have Opt to just draw a card and scry one. And finally, pseudo draw in the form of Invasion of Arcavios. When this touches the battlefield, search our library for any instant or sorcery that we want, put it in our hand. Then, if we can hit this card, it is a battle with 7 health. If we can knock that 7 health off the Invasion of Arcavios, it flips into the Invocation of the Founders, which has Zimone and Dina and Kellen and every single cool character from Strixhaven all here. Whenever we cast an instant or a sorcery spell from our hand, we then get to copy that spell. So this puts us in a position where cards like Opt now say draw 2, scry 2. Unexpected Windfall says discard 1 card, draw 4, make 4 treasures. All kinds of stuff. Invocation of the Founders is a busted ass card in a deck like this. And realistically, that is what we want. We want a deck that looks super threatening when we put it on the board, and it's a race for our opponents to get rid of the deck or die, basically. But we need to make sure that our opponents don't have a downhill battle in trying to win the game. We want them to have an uphill battle. So let's have a little bit of a discussion about how we are going to remove all of our opponent's stuff from the board. We are running a 13-card dense removal and interaction package with more board wipes on top of that. Let's begin with Sinister Sabotage, as we are going to be leaning very heavily into counter spells. We are going to not be establishing a big board, but once we have one, we need to keep it alive. So Hexproof is one of the ways we're going to be doing that. Counter spells is the other way. Sinister Sabotage counters a spell and then surveils 1 for us. Disruption Protocol counters a spell and lets us tap, say, a treasure to lower its cost by 1. Negate counters any non-creature creature spell. Hornswoggle counters a creature spell and then makes a treasure for us. Wizard's Retort counters any spell, and it costs 1 less if Niv Mizzet is on the board. Disrupt can counter an instant or sorcery spell unless our opponents pay 1, but it lets us draw a card on top of that to replace itself. Cancel lets us counter target spell. Spell Snuff lets us counter target spell, and if we are dying, we draw a card to replace it. That's all the counter spells we are running. What else are we going to be using? Well, let's talk about Smashing Success. This blows up an artifact or a land, and if an artifact is blown up this way, we make a treasure token. Fidaria's Fireball can deal 5 damage to a creature or planeswalker, and then 2 damage to every other player, depending on the dice roll, allowing our commander to draw us 6 cards. Jaya Venerated Fire Mage allows any of our cards that would deal damage to a permanent or player to deal 1 more damage, letting us close the game out even faster, and of course, it can deal 2, quote, 3 damage to any target by negging itself by 2. A Braid can blow up any artifact or any creature with toughness 3 or less, and Fiery Confluence can deal 1 damage to every creature, 2 damage to every opponent, or blow up an artifact. You choose 3 modes on here. You can choose the same mode more than once. This allows you to say, I don't know, deal 6 to all the opponents and draw 18 cards if you really want. I mean, yeah, sky's the limit. You have fun with this. This is your deck now. I'm putting this monstrosity in your hands. None of this is my fault. Whatever happens after this, it is y'all's fault. You chose to play this. So, in terms of board wipes, let's also talk about Consuming Tide. This lets us choose Niv Mizzet, and then everything else goes into our hand. Everything else goes into our opponent's hands, except for 1 non-land permanent they control. And then we have Invasion of Karsus, which deals 3 damage to every creature and each planeswalker, and flips over to the Refraction Elemental, which says whenever we cast a spell, deal 2 damage to each opponent. And I hope you can see how that does just gangbusters with Niv Mizzet. Honestly, more people should play Battles. They do way more work than I think Wizards of the Coast even thought they would do on their own. These things are fantastic. Anyways, that's it for removal. Let's talk about being able to afford all these cards, and not monetarily, I mean mana-wise, because like 6 mana in Izzet, that is a chunky cost to absorb. Let's get into that. We are running 14 ramp pieces, not counting the cards that generate treasures incrementally in the deck. So let's start with the 2 mana rocks of Sky Diamond and Fire Diamond, and Izzet Signet and Liquid Metal Torque and Arcane Signet. So all of these are basic mana rocks with the exceptions of the Liquid Metal Torque and the Izzet Signet. The Izzet Signet can turn any of our non-colored lands and filter them into the colors we need for our deck, and the Liquid Metal Torque can turn anything on the board into an artifact. This can be useful in case somebody casts non-artifact removal and we want to quickly flip our commander into an artifact. Say somebody casts one of those old black removal spells that can't destroy an artifact creature, or cast a Shriek Maw on our commander. Tap Liquid Metal Torque, suddenly our commander has artifact status. Alternatively, if our opponent has an enchantment on the board that we can't get rid of, use the Liquid Metal Torque to turn that enchantment into an artifact, and then crack it with one of our artifact removal spells like a Braid. Liquid Metal Torque is one of the best cards in Magic the Gathering's Commander format for a reason, and more people should be playing it. Anyway, as far as other ramp, Young Red Dragon makes a treasure for us and also becomes a flying creature that we can use to chip damage on our opponents. Navigation Orb can grab 2 basic lands or gates from the deck and put them onto the battlefield, which is really helpful in this deck. I'm not even gonna lie. Honored Heirloom allows us to get rid of cards in graveyards while also just being a good mana rock in its own right. Worn Power Stone's a 3 mana rock that taps for 2 mana. Really good in a deck like this. Hedron Archive and Stonespeaker Crystal cost 1 more but do the same thing, but have the added benefit of being able to crack themselves to either draw cards or get rid of graveyards. Then we have Strike It Rich to make a treasure token not once but twice, once from the graveyard. Stormkiln Artist, so that anytime we cast an instant or sorcery we get to make a treasure token. And Midnight Clock, which will allow us to prevent ourselves from dying by resetting all the cards in our deck into our, or in our graveyard into our deck, and our hand into our deck, so that if our commander were to draw us out so we would die, the Midnight Clock can be here to save us. And while not ramp pieces, I forgot to talk about these guys. Campfire and Clear the Mind are doing the same thing, letting us shuffle our graveyard into our library so that we don't die to our own commander's ability. abilities. Then moving on to the lands, we are running 7 mountains and 8 islands to account for us having a bit of a heavier lean on blue thanks to our counter spells. Then in our dual lands, we are running a Ferris Lake as a filter land, a Frostboil Snarl as a reveal land, Command Tower and Exotic Orchard as the auto includes Wizards Should Have Never Printed. Izzet Boiler Works to get our cards that give us enter the battlefield effects on the battlefield, lets us use those over and over and over again because it is a bounce land that also taps for 2. And speaking of that, we have Temple of Epiphany, which lets us scry 1 when it touches the board, so we can filter out bad hands. Yeah, I know, temples. I'm not the big fan of them either, but the Surveil lands are starting to turn me onto the idea. Moving on to the fetching lands, we have Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds to crack for any basic land, Shire Terrace and Promising Vein to crack for a basic land, and also be generically good colorless mana until we need to crap them, and Myriad Landscape, which enters the battlefield tapped, but we can crack it to get two basic land cards that are the same type and put them onto the battlefield. We're also going to be running some utility lands in Shivan Gorge, dealing 1 damage to each opponent, drawing us 3 with our commander, Spine Rock Knoll, letting us cast a spell for free from the top 4 cards of our deck if we deal 7 damage to an opponent, and Pit of Offerings to keep a graveyard clean and tidy. And then we are running 7 gates because we do have Crackling Perimeter, and we need to support the card. This deck is running more tap lands than normal as a result, but it'll be okay. Cliffgate and Seagate both come into play as 1 color and then can tap for the other color once we choose it. Gateway Plaza comes into play tapped and can tap for any color, but we have to pay 1 mana to keep it on the board the turn it comes out. Izzet Guildgate is just a standard Izzet land, but a gate. Heapgate is closer to Gateway Plaza in its utility, but functionally allows us to just tap other gates to make tokens. Useful if we get it early. Gaunt Gate lets all of our gates come to battlefield untapped, and Basilisk Gate can give a creature XX until end of turn, where X is the number of gates we control. Use this to make our commander have a little bit of extra oomph to potentially Voltron down a player if they are in a position where we need to Voltron them down. And that does it for all of the mana for the deck. Honestly, it's a very straightforward deck, very, very close to the Niv Mizzet Perun Wheels style decks, but I think with a little more power and oomph added onto them. But let's talk about how to play the deck so we can maybe kind of dive into that. Let's talk keepable hands. You want some ramp and you want some removal. Draw will come when it does, but main things you need are 2 to 3 lands, 2 to 3 ramp, and some ways to remove things off the board. We don't quite have that hand here, but we have something that may actually build into it just fine. Navigation Orb can ramp us with 2 gates. Really, really good. Temple of Epiphany can help us sculpt our first draw. Giant's Amulet can protect our commander once it touches the board. Promising Vein can get us the other half of the mana we need, probably extra blue mana given that we have Wizard's Retort here. Honestly, it's a bit of a risk, but I think we can keep this. So let's draw open, and we have Niv Mizzet the Firemind as our first draw. Let's go ahead and drop that Temple of Epiphany down and see what our top card is. It's a mountain. We need to keep that, and we move into our turn 2, where we can go ahead and play. Let's go ahead and say, play the mountain, tap 2, and let's get the Thermo Alchemist online so we can start burning people a bit early. Next turn comes around, and we can go ahead and drop an island on the board, tapping 3 and getting that Navigation Orb online and using the Thermo Alchemist to deal 1 damage to each opponent. We move on to turn 4, and we have an Unruly Catapult, another card to work with the Thermo Alchemist. What we need more than anything right now, though, are the gates from Navigation Orb, so let's go ahead and tap 2, crack the Navigation Orb, and get 2 gates from our deck. Let's grab Gond Gate and Izzet Guildgate, and we'll play the Izzet Guildgate down as our land for turn. This way we have 3 mana available we can use at our discretion. Honestly, with the way things are set up right now, I think the best thing to do would be to tap 3, and let's go ahead and put that Unruly Catapult on the board and tap the Thermal Alchemist to do a little more damage. Moving into turn 5, we have Clear the Mind. We don't need that quite yet. Let's play Promising Vein, and looking at everything, we could play our commander right now. And honestly, if our opponents are tapped out, then it's what we should do. Let's go ahead and drop our commander down. And boom, Niv Mizzet is out turn 5. Tap the Unruly Catapult to draw 3. Tap the Thermo Alchemist to draw 3. And now we can just discard down and sculpt ourselves a good hand for the following turn. Now, there's very little chance our commander survived all of that, so let's go ahead and throw our commander into the command zone, assume that it died, and we're gonna go ahead and play Heapgate down. And looking at where we are at, we've got a couple of options here, but I think the best one is to get the Giant Amulet down and have this ready for a follow-up turn. And let's go ahead and pass to our opponents. While we could play Niv Mizzet the Firemind right now, we don't need to, and it's likely going to get hit with removal this early, and I'd rather stack up some stuff with the Heapgate. So we are going to use this turn. Once our opponent's turn comes up, we'll negate a powerful spell, something that we needed to get rid of. We'll tap 2, and yeah, we'll tap 2, and then we'll do the Heapgate. Promising Vein's not going to really work for this, so yeah, we'll tap 3. Heapgate's going to make us a treasure token. Moving into turn 7, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 mana with Shivan Gorge. At this stage, we've got a couple of options here. We dealt 4 damage in the previous turn with the Thermal Alchemist, the Unruly Catapult, because, of course, you would tap them, burn everybody for 2, and then after casting the gate, you tap them again. We want to get our commander out, but we don't want our commander to die. We want to keep our commander nice and protected, and we only have, what, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 mana available. Now is probably the time, I would say. 6, let's get Niv Mizzet Firemind out. And let's go ahead and Giant's Amulet him. Give him a bit of protection. Right? That should put him in a very good spot because we've got enough mana to use our commander in the following turn. So whenever we draw a card, this will deal 1 damage to any target. This will put us in a very good spot once our Visionary comes on to the board. We have 1 mana open, and we're not going to do much with that. We're just going to use these to burn our opponents a little bit further, and then move into the next turn. Now we drop the mountain down, tap 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Our commander comes online. Now that our commander is online, we look at the board state. It is very likely that they're going to try to remove either our Niv Mizzet the Firemind or our Niv Mizzet Visionary from the board. So, what we are going to do here is we are just going to try to eliminate the players who are most likely to harm us. We're going to tap the Unruly Catapult, dealing 3 damage to our opponents, drawing 3 cards. This will put 3 triggers of Niv Mizzet the Firemind on the stack. Now that we have 3 triggers of Niv Mizzet the Firemind available, we're going to aim them at the player most likely to hurt us. If that player tries to respond, then we will either tap Niv Mizzet the Firemind or the Thermo Alchemist to put another layer of triggers on the stack. So let's say they try to remove our Visionary at instant speed. Okay, cool. We tap the Niv Mizzet Firemind, we draw 1 card, allowing us to hit our opponents for 1 once more with Niv Mizzet, triggering Niv Mizzet Visionary to draw us a card, and then the loop will continue. If a second form of removal is aimed at our Visionary, we'll tap the Thermo Alchemist, letting us draw 3 cards, putting another trigger above that interaction piece on the stack. This will allow us to basically draw until we have only a couple cards left in our deck, and we will burn out 2 opponents. By this stage, thanks to burning our opponents little by little with the Unruly Catapult and the Thermo Alchemist, 2 of our opponents likely have 20 to 30 life. So if we draw, we've already drawn, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we draw 60 cards. This eliminates 1 player off the board, drawing this 60 set of cards and leaves us with a little bit left. If you need to end this loop at any point, just have Niv Mizzet the Firemind deal 1 damage to any target, as it's only when non-combat damage is dealt to an opponent that the loop continues. So now our hand looks kind of like this, a clean 68 card hand where I don't know what the fuck is in here, and neither do you. We've eliminated a player out of the game, and we can tap 1 and play a campfire down. So if we get to the point where our opponents get rid of our Visionary, we'll discard down, tap the campfire, reshuffle this entire hand back into our library, and get on with the one-on-one game of Magic where we have all of the cards and our opponents have none of them. I don't know what to tell you. We won. We won, everybody. Niv Mizzet Visionary is stupid and broken, and it goes infinite with itself, and it's a dumb card, and it's very powerful. What would you do if you had more money to upgrade this monster? Before we get into the upgrades of the deck, I need to talk about a mistake I think a lot of players are going to make, and that is adding in cards like Bolt Wave and, say, Flame Rift into the deck. Now, the reason I think these are mistakes to add in is not because they're bad cards for the deck, it's because they are not great when the commander's not on the board. Cards like Unruly Catapult provide consistent damage over the course of the game and give you plenty of benefit when the commander is out. Cards like Flame Rift only ever work when the commander is out because they give instant damage and then leave the game, leave the battlefield. They're gone forever. Bolt Wave, same thing. Now, while these are some of the cards people have instantly talked about with the commander going, oh my god, this is so nutty with it, please, I implore you, these effects are fine, but cards like Electrostatic Field and, of course, the cards I've already talked about, like Thermo Alchemist, are going to do this exact job better. A card that sits on the board eats removal for your commander so that your commander can survive later turns, and also does the ability is going to provide way more utility than something that costs a little less mana but only works once. And worst off, the 1 or 2 games that this works very well for you are going to be a false positive you're going to point to in later games going, but I need to keep that effect in. Look at how powerful it was when I did it. It doesn't matter how powerful it was when it worked out the one time. I think cards like this are fine, but cards like Unruly Catapult, Thermo Alchemist, etc. are going to do this actual job of a card better than the alternative. That's my opinion. Argue with me in the comment sections if you want. I believe I'm right on this one. Now, what should you be adding in this deck? Well, you should be adding things that supplement the strategy of the deck, not just make it do the same thing, but in this case, worse. Cards like Rite of the Dragon Caller, that's coming in the exact same set, is phenomenal as an alternate win condition, allowing all the instants and sorceries that we are casting to create 5/5 red dragons, which, while they don't synergize with the commander, are an alternate win con that we can use to prevent ourselves from losing the game outright later on. MDFCs that can take the spots of our basic lands, like Valakut Awakening, which is a land on one side and a wheel on the other. Cards like Pinnacle Monk to give our deck some resiliency as we can cast more instant and sorcery, stuff that was in our graveyard with stuff like this. Cards like Hydroelectric Specimen or Sink into Stupor that allow us to get extra protection abilities stapled onto lands. Better counter spells to protect our strategies. Cards like Untimely Malfunction that can deflecting SWAT problems away from our commander and gives us more ways to get rid of artifacts on the board. Cards like Gleeful Arsonist, which will add a group slug dynamic to the deck. Again, more counter spells like Red Elemental Blast, more protection stuff like Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves will be good. Fire Spitter Whelp as another way to deal damage to every opponent. Again, I like effects like Fire Spitter Whelp way more than effects like Flame Rift in a deck like this. And with alternate win cons aboard, let's go ahead and put Wizard class in here, as it will protect our hand when our commander leaves the battlefield, and also gives us draw, and also turns all the draw into Voltron damage we can use to get around, say, life gain decks. And cards like Torbrand, which supplement effects like Unruly Catapult way more than it supplements effects like Bolt Wave. Torbrand makes Bolt Wave deal 15 damage to everything that we draw 15. That's fine. Torbrand lets Unruly Catapult, after casting a single instant, deal 6 damage to everybody instead of just the 2 damage it originally was going to be doing that way. Torbrand works way better and proves how much more powerful cards like the Fire Spitter Whelp are going to be in this deck than cards like, say, Flame Rift are going to be in this deck. Again, this is not to say Flame Rift is a bad card for this deck. It is to say, if you have a choice between this and other cards like Unruly Catapult, this is and will always be the better option, in my opinion. That all said, I do want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. I think the upgrade path for this deck should be fairly straightforward. Take the less mana efficient cards, swap them out with other things, but honestly, this is the part that I really prefer to leave up to y'all. This is where your deck building ideas, your creativity, your personal sensibilities should inform this deck. All of my $15 decks should exist as 2 things for you. 3 things, depending on who you are. They should exist as 1, a foundation to build from. A very, very budget foundation of a deck that can be built up very, very powerfully, as it is already going to be strong as hell out of the box. 2, the other thing this should be, if you want it to be a budget league deck, something you can play for a very minimal amount of money with other friends who are running a budget league. Or 3, if you are starting out in Commander and you are worried that your decks aren't as powerful as those of your other friends, these should be ways for you to catch up to their power level without spending a lot of money. If you are running these as anything other than a foundation, a budget restriction, or a jumping off point so that you can catch up to people, then maybe there's other Commander channels that you should be looking at besides mine. But my primary focus is always going to be those players who don't have a lot of money to play and really, really, really want to run. I'm not going to tell you how to upgrade specifically the decks, because this is the part where I have to hand it off to you. These work fine for me the way I've built them, but I'm sure there's going to be stuff that doesn't work out well for a player who cares less about mid-range strategies and more about straight combo than I do, for instance. That all said, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe if you haven't already. Maybe even support me on Patreon if you're really feeling frisky. And all things said, thank you for watching. And as always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Agamotto, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fire Shard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one, hopefully.